why would you not spend time on alignment? Because we're already spending time working on the business every day. We're probably spending time and energy and losing money when we're not aligned, because we're sort of swimming against a bit of a tide. And why not swim with the tide so that you're all pushed in the same direction together? Hey, welcome back to the Scale My Clinic podcast. Today, we're going to be covering ownership alignment with my good friends, Craig and Anna from Leadership Creativity. Welcome, guys.
Hi.
Hi, Sachin. Hi, everyone.
Thanks so much for joining us. I was just thinking, I was making some notes about what we might talk about today before. And I was thinking, how long have I known you? And I'm thinking it's nearly 10 years.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I think we met at a meditation retreat.
Absolutely. And that was a very memorable weekend, that one.
Yeah, it was very good.
Absolutely. Very zen. And so over that time, obviously, we've worked together and I've really seen you do amazing work in the leadership and alignment space. And so I thought having you share some of your wisdom, just a tiny amount of your wisdom with our audience would be useful. And I thought today we could talk about alignment amongst ownership groups, which I know you've done a lot of work on, both in general practice, but also outside. And I think your lessons will be relevant and your tips. And so I might just get us started. How would someone feel if they were in an aligned group versus a non-aligned group? How would that show up? What would the symptoms be? We're talking mainly to doctors, so maybe let's talk symptoms. How would they feel?
If you're in a team that's actually aligned, it just feels easy. The decisions come through and everyone just discusses gets their point of view across. We have an open and honest discussion. We may not agree with everything, but we all have our say and we're all heard. And then when we come to a decision, everyone aligns with that and accepts that that's the decision. So there is a level of acceptance sometimes that you may not agree with the decision, but once the decision is made, right, that's what we're doing. And then we work through, or how are we going to achieve that? And it just feels so much easier and more comfortable because we know we're being heard, we're having our say, and then we're agreeing, right, this is the way we're going to go.
I think it's also everyone in the team recognizes what each other brings. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you get on all the time with those people. You can have people who, maybe are very different for you. So if you're maybe very connection driven, you're all about people, you're all about understanding, and somebody else is very much more about getting stuff done and about process. Sometimes that can grate a little, but being aligned means that you see the value in each of those and how they can work best together and find ways to work through that together in a constructive way, even when you're irritating each other maybe a little. And I think that's the thing, is like seeing the strengths and recognizing how to adapt around maybe the weaknesses.
And yeah, along with that, with what Anna's just said, it's important for partnerships, in a general practice, to make sure you understand each other's strengths, and then you set up roles and responsibilities that are aligned with that. So sometimes there's always the challenge of clinical hours versus non-clinical hours for partners and owners. But if someone's really good at marketing, for example, they're going to take the lead on that. If someone else is really good at finance, they may take the lead on that, and making sure you understand that and you give the right people with the right skills, the right role and responsibility across the business, so that the business as an entity is going to run effectively.
And the signs of misalignment is almost the opposite of that. It's where you're rubbing each other up the wrong way and you're just kind of...
I disagree.
irritated by the other, speaking over each other.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Just not allowing space, my way or the highway, all those kinds of behaviors that, as leaders generally, we encourage people not to show outwardly when in a group setting, but it's it's also things like decisions just don't get made. So you have a meeting, and you don't want to have a whole ton of meetings when you're running a medical center. And so you want them to be efficient. But what happens is you talk and talk and talk and talk around subjects. And there's not really either a go forward path, or even if you do finally get to a decision after maybe weeks of negotiating it outside, it gets re-prosecuted. Like, people go outside the room and start to talk to maybe the other partners or the PM, the rest of the leaders in the team, and trying to kind of like undermine the decision that was made. So even if it was decided, no action actually happens as a result. So that's the kind of stuff you see when that alignment's just not happening.
Okay. And so what I'm hearing is, when we're aligned, we respect each other's differences. We hear each other out and have tough conversations if we need to. And then when a decision's made, we have loyal disagreement in that we've all had the opportunity to say our piece, debate, argue, and then the decision's made, and then we all get behind it and we move forward. And the opposite is that we get to situations where maybe some people overpower others in the decision-making process. So some people may not even have their say. But then when a decision's made, there's no loyalty to that decision in that, well, either a decision never gets made because people talk and talk and talk but don't decide, or they talk and talk and talk, decide, then there are side chats and conversations happening and sort of creation of factions on the side to try and undermine or prevent decisions even after they've been made from being actioned.
Yeah.
Cool.
So
Anything else?
Misalignment that, that can sometimes, hopefully not very often, be open warfare. It's just the partners don't like each other. They won't spend time with each other. There's that undercurrent across the practice that turns into more of a toxic culture more generally. And, people are taking sides and those kind of things where, like in an argument. Or we had one partnership group, we didn't end up working with them. It wasn't in a general practice, but the partners hadn't spoken to each other outside of a formal structured meeting, which they had, I think, once a month for over 12 years. And it's a fairly special business, so I don't know how they do it, but it was a real sense of, like, you could walk in, you could almost feel it in the air. And then when they were in public together, everyone kind of knew about this challenge. So yeah, I don't know how they continue to operate. And I know that the staff, was almost forced to pick a side, and then you only worked in that part of the business. So not ideal to have that kind of environment when you walk in and you already know you're going to have a bad day. It's not great.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. It's the feeling, when you talk about culture, it's how people feel on Sunday night when they're thinking about, I've got to go to work tomorrow. When you talk about partnerships, it's that same thing. How do I feel, or how do they feel when they're going to a partnership meeting, when they're going into the office or the practice? How do they feel about working with those partners? We've worked with a number of partnerships where there's so much animosity, they struggle to talk to each other. And when they do, it's often ends up in yelling and disagreement and, violent disagreement, which is just not fun for anyone. And the teams around them will always feel that. And they'll always, often they hear it, but they'll feel it. The energy as leaders, the energy we carry always has an impact on the people around us. And if the partners have got that aggressive, frustrated, angry sort of energy, everyone feels it. And then that starts to permeate across the teams. And a lot of it is about how you feel about working with your partners.
And so if we've got a misaligned ownership group, say, what are the flow-on impacts to the business and the business performance in your experience? Like, what actually happens downstream of that?
Yeah, so I think the biggest piece, and especially we see working with yourself and Todd, is the people that fail to improve because of this misalignment. It's almost like you have to do this work up front in order to implement any meaningful change and any uplift in your business. Because if you're not able to decide and you're not able to get in rooms with people and have constructive conversations about how you move forward, how on earth are you going to implement, new systems, new processes, new ways of working? It's just going to be hard all the way through. So I think that's really critical.
I think some of the other things that occur as a result of misalignment is high staff turnover, because they're just not happy, that they can see that there's a lot of, we're not getting good decisions that everyone's following through with. It's fragmented. You start to get, as you say, factions start to be created, because if I don't agree with that decision, I go off as a partner and I start talking to some of the team and get them on to my way of thinking. So you start to get infighting between the various who people are aligned with, and then that becomes creates a lot of animosity. People are unhappy, and then it's like, well, I've had enough of this. I'm out. I'm going to go somewhere where it's a lot more comfortable, a lot more friendly to actually work.
Yeah, one of the fundamental things that's required in all teams, so even the leadership team and in the wider team, is this understanding of a kind of a bedding down of trust. There has to be a certain level of trust across the team. And when you display these behaviors, it breaks the trust, because you can have all your values and visions and things on your boards and say, this is how we would ideally behave, but then your actual behavior isn't showing that. So you're not walking the talk, you're not doing what you say you're going to do. And fundamentally, if people see that, they will know that they can't trust you and that maybe they can't trust each other. And so it just erodes over time to this point where people are really looking out for themselves and like, I'm only here because I need to earn the money. And as soon as something better comes along, I'm gone. And, or, I hear occasionally I'll just get my billing hours done and then I'm off.
And this is why a lot of the time when we start talking to GP owners and business owners generally for that matter, you can sort of start to understand the symptoms, because generally we see what's happening and they're the symptoms, they're not often the cause. And this is why we'll often go back to, well, let's look at the overall strategy. What's the purpose, vision, values, behaviors across the practice? Because if you've got those defined and everyone agrees to those, then you've got a framework to work within, and we can hold each other accountable to that. And often we've done a number of workshops where it is challenging in GPs where you've got a lot of contract doctors, and we often do them on weekends, but get as many people from the practice into a room and agree those things. What are we here for? What's our purpose? What's the vision for the practice? What's really important to us in our values, and how are we going to treat each other and our suppliers and our patients? And if you can get everyone to, majority of people to agree on that, and then communicate that and really roll it out, and then most importantly, the partners display those behaviors and recognize others who are displaying them, that's sort of the foundation of driving a good culture and understanding how we keep everyone aligned to that.
So it's do as I do, not as I say, right? It's
Absolutely.
yeah. All right. So I'm someone maybe who is listening to this, and maybe things are not quite aligned where I am. What are maybe 2, 3, 4 things I could do immediately that would maybe help start to improve alignment in my business at the ownership level?
Ideally, having a bit of a reset would be great, but I recognize that that's not immediately accessible for everyone, and we'll talk about that in a second. So I think having some bravery around calling it out, and that can be really challenging, and it does take quite a bit of courage to be the person that says, are you aware that what you just said came across as rude, or something similar, depending on what's going on, of just challenging that behavior fairly gently at first. Because if you say something like, are you aware, rather than you are rude, it makes it about the behavior rather than the person. So depending on the type of behavior that's going on, is finding a way to gently challenge that and say, maybe if you do have a set of values that are set already, of using language such as, I know we all agreed that a priority for us is being supportive, and I'm not really feeling that in the room right now. it's a gentler way than having to directly challenge somebody's thoughts and words.
And that comes back to that feedback framework that we've often used and we've talked about with the Project X clients around, situation, behavior, impact. What's the situation? What's the behavior? What was the impact? So when you're giving feedback, that really helps, and being vulnerable to just open up and be real about what's happening. The other thing is, ideally, you get the partners into a room to have that open and honest discussion. I've said it to a few groups when I'm with the right team. I used it the other day when I was in one of the first sessions. I was with a different client, and it's like, okay, guys, check your egos at the door. Let's have a really open and honest discussion about where we're at here, because it's obviously not working well. We need to understand how we can work together for the benefit of ourselves, our people, and the business. And that applies to any business, any partnership. It's really about having those real honest, open discussions, not being offended by things, because we all perceive things in our own way. And people's perception is their reality. So understanding that it's not always about right and wrong. It's about how people perceive things and how we can understand to work better together so that we get a better outcome. And having those really open, honest discussions, and they can be really challenging at times. They can be really tough to actually come to terms with. That you often see like, oh, that wasn't my intention. I wasn't aware that that's how you see it. But if you don't talk about it, then they'll never know. And that's a big part of it.
Nice. So we've got calling out behaviors that don't fit with agreed values that you've already set. We've got a reset, which is an open, honest, like I call it the Teflon conversation. In that you put on your Teflon suit, all of you go in and you just like all out. We might call it a whiffle, what I feel like expressing. There's different expressions for it, but it's just having an honest, non-judgmental conversation and hearing each other properly. Is that what we mean?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's initial. And then I think there's a kind of the bigger component of it when you've started to move in that direction is having a review of why you do what you do as a practice or a business if you've got multiple practices. And you're kind of sitting down and having that conversation again. And if you've already got a very clear purpose, it's re-engaging with that and saying, okay, 12 months ago, we said that our purpose is this. Does that still ring true for us? What's changed in that time? And do we need to make any adjustments? And then you're all gathering around something you agree on for maybe the first time in a while. And so there's just a really positive energy about moving forward optimistically. So even if you're disagreeing about everything else, you've now got one thing that you're aligned around. And then if you can then move on to your vision and say, okay, where are we going? We know why we're doing it, but where are we going and what are we hoping our impact on the world is going to be because we do this? And then you're expanding that view of this is something else we now agree on and it's forward focused. So it's good for the soul. And then so that then you build from there in terms of, okay, well, if that's true, what roles and responsibilities should we take as partners? What are our strengths? And what are we going to kind of empower other people to do on our behalf? Because we can't all do everything. So it starts to then be this bigger and bigger set of things we agree on. And then later, if things start to get fractured again, you've got something to pull it back to. You've got this fundamental agreement that you all had together.
There's something else that is really important to remember as well. When you get to that point of the reset and you start to look forward, is emotionally and psychologically, partners need to stop themselves from reverting back to what happened in the past and how we saw things and what that person did, and keep looking forward about what we want to see. It's the old thing, you'll always find what you look for. So if people keep referring back to the problem of the past, they're going to find problems in the future. But if we change our focus And a lot of it is emotional, because there is a lot of emotion comes up in this at this point. If we change our focus to, right, this is what we want to be, this is how we want to work together, this is our purpose now, and stay focused on that, and we keep talking about those things that we want to see, and forget the problems of the past. You don't ignore them totally, but it's like, we had problems, this is the solution, let's focus on the positives about how we move forward. And what we often see is, and I've had this a number of times, where someone will be there and it's like, they just keep going back to how it was. It's like, stop that. And there's times that I've just cut it off. It's like, look forward, keep looking forward. And it starts to change the mindset about how we see things. And that's really important.
And once you're in that, if that positive forward mindset, you can pick out the lessons that you may have learned in the past, so that you don't make the same ones again. But it's not just keep bringing up the same issues that you can't change because they've happened, but you can change how you deal with them going forward.
There's a line from a great motivator, Tony Robbins, and it's like, the past doesn't equal the future unless you live there. And it's very true. If you keep focused on the past and the problems, then you're going to keep seeing. So let's look at a more positive future about how we want to do, what we want to do, how we're going to behave, how we're going to treat each other, what we want to achieve.
Absolutely. I was going to say, it's a bit like trying to drive looking in the rearview mirror.
Yes.
It's pretty dangerous.
Yeah, the eyes are in the front of your head for a reason, to look forward.
Take whichever adage or cliche that you need from this, use it and live it. And so that's really helpful. You've given some pointers as to how to go about repairing alignment or realigning. Don't see a chiropractor I didn't hear chiropractor there. Now, anyway, what about external facilitation? Obviously, that's one of the things that you do. Where does that come into this? When should people be thinking about? And I know in a minute I'll ask you for some examples where you've done it, but where should people be thinking about the role of external facilitation?
As early as possible. Often we get called in when there's major problems that have already happened. And there's a number of times where business owner or a partner they're going to run the facilitation, run the workshop, and it's really hard to facilitate if you're part of the solution. And the other side of it is, if you're a partner and you're running a workshop with the team, then you've got biases without even realizing it. And it's hard to be very diplomatic and open and fair to make sure that it goes where the team needs it to go, as apart from where you're guiding it. When you've got an independent facilitator who's got the only vested interest we have as facilitators is to get the best outcome for the people in the room, whatever that may be. So we take it through a process to achieve that. And then as mentors as well, we offer a bunch of mentoring throughout that. So ideally, we'd like to be called in right at the start, so that we can work with a team that's already in a good position, so we can make it better. But often it's after the big problems have eventuated, and we're helping them recover the relationship, the alignment, so that they can actually start moving forward positively.
I think people underestimate the energy it takes to facilitate. Like when we've done a full day, we're like, you need a few hours the next day of just peace and quiet, at least. If you've done multi-days, you need a long period of time to recover, because you're focused for every minute on what's the conversation, what is the body language for each person in the room, who is buying in, who is buying out, how do we draw this to a conclusion? Are we actually getting real agreement, or are they saying they're agreed but I can tell that they're not? There's all those kind of things happening, and you're also at that point kind of running maybe spreadsheets, boards, whatever's going on to get the input. If you're trying to do that and you're trying to be part of the conversation, it's very difficult, very draining, and it doesn't seem to be as successful. We often get called in and we'll say, we had a kind of planning session, but we didn't really stick to the outcomes. So I think people underestimate the effort it takes to run things fairly smoothly and keep them on track.
A few years ago, and it's a long-term client that I work with once or twice a year to do facilitate their workshops. And the very first one I did with them, the quote from the business owner at the time was, "We got more done in one day than we normally get done in 3 with with Craig facilitating. And that's the sort of the impact, because our understanding is what's the outcome you're looking to achieve. We do a lot of prep work. We work through the day, as Anna said, and there's a lot goes into that. And then particularly when you're doing a multi-day one, at the end of the day, people want to go out and have dinner and have a drink. Where they're thinking, right, what have I got to adjust for tomorrow? How are we going to take this in tomorrow? What have we got done? And it takes, an 8-hour workshop probably takes 12 hours of our time, before and after, and then particularly on a multi-day thing. So it's the first one I did, not the first one, but one I did was 3 days, I think. I slept for a day afterwards because I was just exhausted. And admittedly, they were a tough group, because they had a lot of very strong personalities and great ideas and things, but it's really draining. And so having an external facilitator is always going to get a better outcome.
And so it would be useful to get an insight or, things you've seen, examples of aligned or misaligned groups that have become aligned, or maybe misaligned groups that took a different path, because sometimes alignment, I assume, is not possible to resolve. So I'd love to just hear some examples of where you've seen people. And sometimes I bet you people have called you in early and they've just had a little course correction that's solved things. Or I know there's one example that I remember well where someone thanked me that I'd introduced them to you, who was actually thinking of joining a partnership and then went through a process with you. So I'd love to just hear like a little smorgasbord of examples.
And I think that's a really important point before Anna goes into that example, is for anyone who's thinking of entering into a partnership, it's a really good idea to do a lot of this work right up front before. I've worked with two practices that joined, and we went through the whole process before they actually had anything in place to make sure they were aligned. And it worked out, they were perfectly aligned. It was a great outcome. It all worked perfectly, and it was as smooth as anything because we worked out everything around how they were going to treat the teams, who was staying and who was not staying, how they were communicating. And it was a beautiful example of how it works perfectly.
Yeah, I think when you're bringing two teams together, because we've worked with a few practices where they're growing, emerging. We've worked with a few joint ventures outside of practices, and we kind of think, oh, well, everything's working well here at this clinic, and therefore, if we get these people on side, they'll just start working like in the same way we work. But they've got an entirely different way of working in a different culture. So having those discussions up front and saying, well, are we going to take the best of both worlds? So we're going to kind of like force people into the new culture, like never a good idea. So having those conversations and working out how do we make sure that the culture that we're bringing in, if we're happy with the way we're working, doesn't affect the way we're working poorly, and or how do we know that we're not impacting the other practice coming in and that they're all going to leave. So it's really great to have those conversations up front.
Yeah, there's a lot of change management that goes on, particularly around this when you're bringing practices together and joining. And the simplest little things sometimes when there is change like that can set people off. And you might think, like, that's just so unimportant, but it's important to that person. And I've certainly I've worked through a lot of change, even in my corporate career. People can handle the biggest change with no problem. And then you tweak something and they freak out and they really struggle with it, and there's resistance and they just don't want to come along. So, managing that change and understanding how people go through change is really important. But you might want to talk about the good outcome, the other good outcome.
Yeah. So Sachin and Todd sent through a Scale My Clinic client who was looking to go into partnership. She had wanted to be a partner for a long time and was looking for various opportunities. And we sat down and discussed some of this stuff around, having these conversations up front. And she went away and had some of these conversations. And I think it was only about a couple of hours in, she had this blinding lights come down and give her a realization that if they went into business together, it was going to be rough the whole way through. Like there was a very dominant personality in the group, who they hadn't really had a lot of time with because they've been talking to other partners. I don't know whether they'd kept this person hidden or what had happened, but this kind of emerged fairly quickly around this would not be a happy marriage, so to speak, and they pulled out. And obviously that was a great result for that person in terms of then going and being able to find a partnership that they felt they could really contribute to and be part of.
Yeah, there's a number of examples we've got with GP clinics where you've got 2 or more partners and they're at different stages of where they want the practice to go. And it could be because, that they're heading towards retirement, or they're just different people. The classic is when you've got someone who's a real entrepreneurial type brain, they want to see things change, they want to grow the business, they want to improve things, and someone else is there and it's like, no, I'm quite happy with this the way it is, and we'll just keep going and chugging along, and we don't need to change anything because it's always worked. And then someone else in the middle who has got a slightly different approach. And we get called into those, and that's where it gets really hard to get everyone into a room because they're at such different ideas of where they want things to be and what they're doing, that it's like, I don't see a need for that. I'm happy with where we're at. We don't need to work through anything. And the entrepreneurial person who's really wants to drive things forward is getting so frustrated because there's all these great ideas we've got. We're in Project X and all this, drinking from the fire hose. They've got so many things going on and there's so much we could do and I can't get anything to happen. And we see that quite a bit, to various extremes, various levels. And it's what we normally do is try, when they come to me, it's try and get to talk to each individual. If there's resistance to even talk, let's have a chat, because then we can find what's their interest and what's the benefit to them, so we can actually start to get them understanding, maybe there would be some good ideas. It might be a benefit of getting into a room with someone to help us through this. And once we can get them into a room, generally we're going to get a better outcome. Don't always get exactly what each individual wants, but we'll work to get some sort of alignment and understanding and get some clarity around the roles and responsibilities, because just because someone wants the practice to really grow and thrive and put all this change in place doesn't mean the other person has to stop it. They don't necessarily have to put in all these extra hours, but it's understanding, well, how are we going to work together to get the outcome?
So generally, we get the team more aligned, but I think it's one of those things, it's not a one and done. No. Because we're all humans and we all go through different life stages. So, somebody who can be kind of cruising along, adding value, doing great stuff, suddenly has something happen in life, and then that changes, and then the misalignment comes back in. So I think one of the things we generally agree on within the face-to-faces is like, how do we maintain this? What are the meetings that they're going to have as a team ongoing, and how are they going to run them? What are the behaviors going to be? Like, as a leadership team, how do we show up for each other? How do we make it so that if we start to see misalignment, that we call it out? So when do we need to have those courageous conversations and giving each other permission to have those? I think all of that is really important, because it's not we'll have a one-day workshop and everything will be fine from here on in. There's an ongoing need to stay aligned, and they need to agree how they're going to do that.
And further to that, with the meetings, it's really important to make sure that each meeting has a very clear purpose. So there might be a monthly, bi-monthly strategy meeting, and when you talk about more the strategic things, you might have a weekly operational meeting, which really talks about the day-to-day stuff that's going on, and making sure that however you set that framework up, that each meeting has the right people in the room, a very clear purpose, and the people in the room get benefit from the meeting. There's nothing worse than having people in the room and they sit there and it's like, and I was in one the other day, and it's like, I went to this, it was more of a local meeting around the community, and I sat there and I said to anyone, when I got back, it was an hour and a half, and I said, I think I got about 15 minutes of value from that. And then the rest of the time I'm sitting there like, oh, please just stop talking. But so when you're in the business, it's really important that you have the right people in the room, very clear purpose, and everyone in the room gets value from the meeting, because then everyone wants to do it and they see the value, so they're going to be engaged.
Absolutely. The thing that stands out for me amongst everything else that you've talked about is why would you not spend time on alignment? Because we're already spending time working on the business every day. We're probably spending time and energy and losing money when we're not aligned, because we're sort of swimming against a bit of a tide. And why not swim with the tide so that you're all, pushed in the same direction together? Maybe I've used the wrong analogy with water and tides. I know you're divers, and
in the longer term.
Yeah.
Doing it up front it always gets a better result.
I think because alignment is hard to measure, people are kind of sometimes thinking it's quite fluffy, but actually it's not. It's the fundamental kind of, it's the foundation from which you can then build everything else. As we know, you can't build from a rocky foundation because everything just collapses as soon as you put any kind of strain on it.
With what?
Oh, yeah, I'm so proud of myself. Finally. So I think that's the key, is like, is your foundation stable as a team and as an ownership group? Because then you can do great things.
Absolutely. And as proof of that, I actually made a note of 3 podcast episodes, episode 72, 64, and 50. I'll put them in the show notes below, which are stories of groups who have been fully aligned and what they've been able to achieve. And it's quite extraordinary when that's in place, and it just supports all the things you've shared. So Craig, Anna, if there's one message any practice owner or potential practice owner, what would that message or lesson be? You'll get 2 because you'll get 1 each, because I'm not sure if you're aligned on that yet. Dung, dung.
Whoever goes first has the easy job. You can go first.
My thing, and I think I've said it twice already, is this thing about courage. It's actually one of my things when I do a mantra about my values and what's important to me. Courage is one of my key values because, at heart, I'm a bit of a scaredy cat. So there's a lot of things I do that take courage. And I think if you want something to change, then you need to change. And changing yourself can be uncomfortable. And speaking up when your habit is to stay quiet needs change and courage. So it's having that moment of taking that deep breath and going, no, if we're going to raise the standard, then we need to challenge each other on this in a respectful and encouraging way. I need to say something about what that person just said. Like, we need to be more supportive of each other, or do you realize you spoke over the person? I would like to hear what they have to say. Now, it doesn't, like in and of itself, it might not feel like courage for people who are already fairly brave, but for some people, that is a really massive step of finally stepping in and saying, this is where I draw the line. This is my new boundary. So I think that's for me would be the thing to take away, is do one courageous thing this week.
And so I've got to come out with another one-liner. I learned it many years ago when I was in corporate, and I first started doing some leadership training. And one of the line that they stated, which has stuck with me because it is so true, and it's in line with what Anna's just said: for things to change, first I must change. And whether that's my behavior, my thinking, whatever it is, but if you want things to change, you've got to change first. So in answer to your question, I think for me, and it's something I've learnt to live by, is if I've got the urge to do something, if I'm not happy with something and I think we need to change, make sure you do it straight away. Don't put it off, because often, particularly when we talk about partnerships and alignment, we think it's too hard. It's going to create too much animosity. Like, it's just going to make it. No, it's not. It's not going to get better over time. If there's a problem and you want to fix it or you want to address it, then let's get in and deal with it as quickly as possible, because the longer you let it go, the more it becomes ingrained and the harder it is to change. So trust your instinct. If you see a problem and you think we need to do it, then find a way to get everyone into the room and let's work through it. Putting it off only makes it worse.
Absolutely. When would now be a good time to solve my misalignment? So with that, I'd just like to thank Anna and Craig from Leadership Creativity. We're going to put all your contact details in the show notes below. So anyone listening or watching who wants to discuss alignment, I highly recommend Anna and Craig. They've done great work with many practice owners. And they're committed to this industry. And so, guys, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. We'll be back with a future episode about a wider alignment across the team. Thank you, Anna and Craig.
Thanks, Sachin.
Thanks, Sachin.
Why would you not spend time on alignment? Because we're already spending time working on the business every day. We're probably spending time and energy and losing money when we're not aligned, because we're sort of swimming against a bit of a tide. And why not swim with the tide so that you're all pushed in the same direction together?